Wednesday. Welcome to the best college football show on the internet. This is Behind the Point Spread, presented by BetFred Sports. I'm Travis Justice, and over the next half hour or so, we're going to be taking a look at some of the biggest college football games in the country this week. We're talking about Conference Championship Week. We're going to go inside the Pac-12, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC. Before we get started tonight, you're watching most likely on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It's very, very simple. Just hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be able to get all the content that we put out on a weekly basis. And, of course, we won't stop during the off season. If you're watching on Facebook or if you're watching on Twitter, you can interact with us tonight. That's right. All you have to do is use the comment section, and your comments will pop up, and we'll be able to hear what, some questions you have. But better yet, this is a live call-in show as well, and you're more than welcome to pick up your phone and say, you know what, I want to ask Scott Spreitzer a question. I want to ask Dr. Rob Zatechka a question. You can do that by calling 402-543-5556. Just to let you know, when you call, my son Owen's going to pick up the phone. He's going to say, welcome to Doc Talk. He's going to screen your call and then put you into the queue, and we'll get you ready to go. So speaking of being ready to go, let's bring in the two other men that, are ready to go. And God, this season flew by. It seems like just not too long ago we were doing week one. Here we are, Scott Spreitzer and Dr. Rob Zatechka on championship weekend.
It's crazy, man. It's like you wait all year for it, for the college football season, then it's gone before you can blink an eye. It seems like it was about 2 nights ago we were talking, is Nebraska going to do this, lose close games and find ways to do it all season long like they did against Minnesota?
And yes, they did.
We found out the answer is YES in capital letters. So it's been an interesting season. I got to say, this has been the toughest season I've had in 20 years, college football. And
really?
Yeah, a lot of guys. There's an invitational at the Circa Hotel. I'll give you guys an example. And I keep getting invited into it every year, but I don't do it because they give out all the plays that everybody puts out on Friday nights, which would be unfair to my clientele to pay. And then, they'd be a little upset, obviously. So I have to turn it down, but there's 20 bettors, professional bettors in this contest this year. And out of the 20, I believe there's only 4 who are having a winning season. And these are sharp professional bettors, not just the Joe off the street who's, playing a 10-team parlay. And so it's been interesting. And we keep trying to talk about, do you think it's because of the availability to transfer almost whenever you want and play almost immediately? Is that part of it? Is it the nil money that's changing the landscape of college football? So the one thing that I noticed that's different this year and maybe last year to a certain extent, but especially this season, guys, is that before the season begins every year, for as long as I've been doing this, usually in late July, early August, we have a bunch of us that put together returning starters, returning second stringers who saw significant playing time the year before due to injuries or what have you. You don't have that anymore. You've got, Team A has 70 different players this year. Team B has 50 and so on and so on. So I think that's just going to cause an adjustment needing to be made for most longtime sports bettors.
Dr. Rob, it was interesting because Matt Rule had his State of the Union today, should we say, the season wrap-up, and he talked about the portal, and he talked about going after a really good portal quarterback could cost between $1 and $2 million. That's the going rate for a quarterback now. You probably didn't make that much in the NFL, did you?
Well, not in 1 year I didn't. Actually, I don't think I made $1 million in my entire career. Actually, I know for a fact I didn't.
You mean it for your entire NFL career?
Entire NFL career.
Wow.
And keep in mind, too, this was like mid-late 1990s. So
that's true.
The dollars were a little different then. But
does that number surprise you, though?
No, because, when you look at Nebraska and they went after Casey Thompson, you and I talked about on the show at that time when they went after Casey. I don't think his number was $1 million, but it was, it was 6 figures.
Oh, absolutely. I remember he did an interview with Frost. He was on with Bussin' with the Boys. I think he said the entire offensive line was making 6 figures. So that's.
Yeah. Most of the guys I've talked with down in Lincoln, you're now. 6 figures can be $100,000. 6 figures can be $900,000. It's kind of a range there, but it's, for a lot of these guys, when you look at it, when it's kind of one of these, I guess I call it sort of a game changer kind of guy. I mean, if you're looking at a Trey Palmer, if you're looking at a Casey Thompson, I mean, these are guys that change how a team plays, and that changed how Nebraska played. I mean, Travis, I don't say this, truly not trying to rub stuff in last year because you got the win this year. But I mean, Trey Palmer's the reason Nebraska, in my opinion, beat Iowa last year.
Yeah, I believe we got wins 5 out of the last 6 years. But I'm just
okay, yeah, you know what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, it's if you've got one guy that can change a game in this day and age, that's worth 6 figures.
Absolutely. But I think this, and Scott, I don't know if you agree with this, you're going to start paying that kind of money. People are going to start wanting return on investment, right? I mean, people want return on investment when they give that kind of money.
Absolutely, they do. And that's, there's a couple of things that are coming down the road anytime now. You better play to the amount you're making or close to it. Also, boy, I hope these I might have said this before on this show. I've said it on other shows. I sure hope these universities have offices that are helping these kids understand about taxes, about the IRS, because I just keep getting the feeling there is a wave of shit coming down the road. And we're going to hear about a lot of guys that didn't pay their taxes. I hope the universities are helping out with that. Real quick note. I had to move my screen around here because I saw the yellow and I thought, holy crap, Travis has converted Dr. Rob. He's wearing Hawkeye colors. And then I moved it away. So, okay, Augustan, I'm all right with that. That's cool. Got a little scared there. Thought I was going to have to just log out and just.
Before we dive into the games tonight, 402-543-5556. Let's go to the phones. That's where Zach is. Zach, you got a question for Scott Spreitzer, Dr. Rob?
Hey, no, this is just a question for everybody. I just was wondering, just the process for somebody that does not know, or a lot of the people that don't know much about NIL or the 1890 initiative. So what exactly, could you explain the process for, hey, we found a game changer, specifically a quarterback out there. And I know Rule said to find a good quarterback, you need to pay, like over $1 million. So what is the process of reaching out to a certain player, specifically a quarterback? And in my opinion, I don't think that Rule, from what his comments are, they would like go this route. But what is the process of reaching out to a quarterback and getting a name that some people might know, and offering him or whatnot to come play for the university?
It's very, very complicated, Zach, and the NCAA rules are absolutely ridiculous, which is why this has all got to go in-house, because technically Matt Rule can't offer any money to a quarterback. That offer and the NIL deal has to come from the 1890 initiative, and then the 1890 initiative needs to reach out to that quarterback. No money can be talked. Now, what can happen is Matt Rule can say, hey, this guy's in the portal, we're going to go after him. And then 1890 has to make the back channel from a money way, and then Matt Rule has to come in from the recruiting way, and so they have to meet in the middle, but they can never communicate. Now, do I think they've never communicated? This is where it's all screwed up, right? I mean, and this goes for every program in the country. If your coach isn't talking to the NIL guy, there's something wrong. The NCAA has this ass backwards. Does that make sense?
There's enough, I've talked to enough guys, whether it's parents, whether it's recruits themselves, coaches. And now I'm going to clarify something here. This is not Nebraska coaches, but there's discussions. I mean, the coaches talk about this stuff. Coaches in schools reach out to players. This discussion happens because we sat around and we've talked about okay, well, how does 1890 know who they're recruiting? How does 1890 know what the priorities are? There's some lines of communication there. Now, I'm sure they're probably separated by 2 or 3 degrees, but those lines of communication are open. And so that is happening. There's no way this process doesn't happen without some
True.
degree of communication involved. And so it is happening. Now, do they try and keep it separate enough that the NC2A comes in and does some kind of investigation? They're not able to find that. Well, the problem is that the NC2A has done so little, has had so little involvement in this from the get-go. I'm not sure how much of these rules are really getting followed anyway in the first place. And so either way, the bottom line is those lines of communication are there.
And rule in Nebraska can't make the financial offer.
Correct.
Yes.
It comes from the whatever the collective itself is. Now, that even being said, though, I know there's the whole tampering thing. It happens. I mean, there's schools that do reach out to contacts of players, whether it's their high school coaches, family members, things like that, to find out, like, hey, is so-and-so actually happy at such and such place? If he's not, yeah, we're totally interested. And if they jump in the portal, we're offering them. That kind of communication happens.
That answer your question, Zach?
Yeah, and I guess I got one more to piggyback off that.
Okay.
Based on Rule coming back to college after being in the NFL and everything changing like this, do you think it's a downside for a coach to come back like that after things have changed and him trying to learn the new times of NIL, not having any experience in it? Saying that he wants to go do the old school way of just building, there's no problem with that. But at some point, you're going to have to do things a little bit different to keep up with all these schools that you see that are always in the running for certain players. And Nebraska's, not one of those schools that you always see that's always, looking at these, let's say a quarterback, for example.
You know what? Can I jump in there for just a second?
Absolutely.
Because my assumption is that it is tougher for a guy like Matt Rule when you consider where he's at now compared to when he went to Temple. Temple's recruiting a certain level of player, and they're not really going up against top-level schools to get those certain level players. Just an assumption on my part. At Nebraska, in order for Nebraska to compete on the field against the Big Ten that they joined and now the new Big Ten, with these Pac-12 schools coming in, he can't recruit, and I don't want to say it's easier, but he can't recruit at an easier level, at a lower level player, because if he wants to compete on the field in the conference he's in now, he's got to compete with those same schools when it comes to recruiting. So For me, my assumption from being around this stuff forever, it's more difficult now. I mean, if he'd stayed in college at Baylor, maybe came to Nebraska after, then it's a different deal. He's used to it. But boy, I just think this is not a completely different ball of wax, but I think there's differences enough to where he's probably thinking behind closed doors sometimes, this isn't what it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago when he was coaching the Temple Owls and trying to recruit.
Yeah, but when he was at Baylor, I mean, Rule's trying to compete against Oklahoma and Texas and A&M and Texas Tech, Okie State. I mean, that's the lineup of guys he's got to recruit against. And so it's, I mean, in terms of the quality of opponent, I'm not sure that's changed much. You're going to have to win. You're going to have the money to do it. Nebraska, I think, is reasonably well positioned.
I would agree with that.
For a school of Nebraska's size, location, and the state they're in, they still have a weird amount of, like a weirdly high amount of NIL dollars to shell out.
Well,
so,
you know, the difference too, though, you mentioned like Baylor, he had Texas. I mean,
he had the state of Texas.
Yeah, there are really, really good players who never get recruited, as you know, Rob, by Texas or A&M. There's a whole lot of good players out there that can turn, you know, a Rice program into a legitimate 8-4 team almost every year. So I think that matters also, because at Baylor he had so many players he could choose from.
I agree with that. I guess the corollary argument would be the fact that I think he still has Texas. I mean, that's one of the things that he and his staff have talked about consistently. And what you hear when you go and talk to high school coaches in Texas is that Matt Rule's one of their guys. He's one of the guys that Texas high school coaches liked, felt like they had a good relationship with, and to this day continue to have that. And I think that still matters. I mean, I think that's still there. So I'm not sure. I don't know if going from Baylor to Nebraska changes that. I mean, you've got Carolina there, the blip in Carolina there in the middle. Now, the other thing is, in terms of a guy that wants to be a developmental guy and pull these guys out of high school, it's the same dynamic. I mean, if you're a 4 or 5 star high school kid versus a big name portal kid, it's the same dynamic. You're still going to have.
I did like what he said today. Is that and there's a dynamic there, but he also said with the NIL, he wants to take care of his current players as opposed to somebody coming in, because you don't need a divided locker room. Money can divide locker rooms, right? And so I like that he said you want to take care of the guys that are there. Hey, Zach, thanks for the phone call, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, talk to you later.
I appreciate
it. The taking care of your current players, that's probably, in my opinion, a bigger deal than whether you're a portal guy or you're a high school recruiting and developmental guy. The biggest change, I think, for a lot of these coaches is how much you've got to re-recruit your own people.
Hey, Rob, Chris wants to know if that's a Coors Light, by the way.
What was that?
There it was.
I heard the crack. I wasn't sure what it was. Yeah, okay.
Good call,
werewolves.
Chris.
Dude, werewolves. I'm scared of them. Silver bullets, baby.
Call. Hey,
is
Scott,
that your go-to when you're
something? What you were
is
going to say?
Is that your go-to, by the way, Coors Light?
That's my
It's his garage beer.
That's my light garage beer. I can have two, feel rehydrated, and we're good for the night.
I do my Coors Lights. I still do after all these years.
I'm going vodka soda tonight, so that's
Trev's hitting it heavy.
Yeah,
going agua fria.
Yeah. Hey, if you want to work with Scott Spreitzer, text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get a free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit docsports.com and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left-hand side of the website. And just because college football is coming to an end doesn't mean you can't continue to work with Scott. He does NBA, NHL, you name it, he can do it. He's probably even in on the Korean Baseball League, aren't you, Scott?
Not since COVID. Had to leave that alone, but I do everything else basically. Haven't done as much soccer since Major League Soccer season ended, but we'll be back at it when the league starts up again next April or May.
BetFred Sports is offering the no-sweat first bet offer. When you sign up with BetFred, you can make your first wager of $20 or more. It will be matched with a Fred bet up to $105 if that initial bet loses. Just use the promo code RUSH, that's all caps RUSH, to get the no-sweat first bet offer. And how about the parlay bonus? When you place 9 football parlays, the 10th parlay is on Fred. Get rewarded with up to a $100 Fred bet each week of the pro football season. Use the promo code parlay. So we are diving into the college football conference championship games tonight. Let's take a look at the games we'll be previewing, and we're going to stick with the Pac-12, the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 10. So we're going to kick things off on Friday night. The Pac-12 is going to be up. This has been a resurgence year for the Pac-12, right? I mean, the Pac-12 is going away as we know it. You got 2 of those teams, Oregon and Washington. They're going to be part of the Big 10 next year, and they are going to make their headway in the Pac-12 championship game Friday night on ABC. Oregon, which lost to Washington earlier in the season, a 9.5-point favorite. The over-under on this game, 66, Scott.
I was asked on a show that I did today downtown Las Vegas on the Musburger Network, VSiN, that they were asking me about this contest, and they were saying, wow, boy, 9.5, that was a lot of points. Some places 10. Before the games were played last weekend, I look at those power ratings and then looked at it again on Sunday night after everybody's completed their weekend of football. And I made it 9. I mean, that's where my power rating said that game should be. So it's right where it should be. Now, if I'm right there, my power ratings are my first step out of like 7 or 8 keys, and we've talked about a bunch of them over the course of the football season. The power rating is the first thing I look at. It doesn't always mean my power rating's half a point off or right on the number. It doesn't mean I'm not going to play the game. So, but I did, want to let everybody know that the number's not there to try to say, hey, we're going to try to trap people into taking Washington here and all those points behind the counter. We're going to clean up because Oregon's going to win. There's those trap things are goofy. That doesn't really happen. It's just where it should be power rated. So that's where the line is. If you go back to the regular season game, which Washington won 36-33, and they won it late, they had to convert a 4th down to get that final touchdown. If you watched it, just throwing everything out emotionally, any bets one of us might have on Washington to win the national title, then you sat there and you go, okay, Oregon was the better team and probably should have won the game, but they didn't. And that's something that kind of, I look back at that and I thought, all right, Oregon to me looked like the better team in that game, looked like they probably would have won 6 out of 10 meetings if they played 10 times against each other. Here's what's going on for me right now, and the reason I played the under thus far, which it was 66.5. It's now 66. We saw that first meeting that came within a minute or so of staying under the total. Took a 4th down conversion, took that late touchdown by Washington to get over the total. It was at 62 with about 95 seconds to go, and then they get the final touchdown. I'm looking at Washington's offense over the last few games, especially the last 2 games. 528 total yards combined in the last 2 games, only 5.2 yards per play. Now, they've talked about maybe Penix was under the weather. He might have had the flu, some bumps and bruises, but by now everybody's got bumps and bruises. Oregon games, their defense is getting better throughout the course of the season. They haven't topped this particular total in the last 3 games. And if you look at their defense, they held the last 3 opponents to 79 yards rushing on 3.6 yards per carry. The average is 323 total yards per game on 5.3 yards per play. That's all they've allowed in their last 3 games. And I might have mentioned it on last week's show. We saw a 31-7 final against Oregon State. If you look at what Nix has done and you chart every single pass, that he's made throughout the course of this 2023 campaign, you'll see that over 60%, it's about 65, about 65% of his passes traveled less than 10 yards in the air. It's all those slants, those diagram plays, get those ultra quick receivers on the run, lead them so they don't have to wait for the football, make the catch, and get yards after catch. So it's not like they're going to be throwing the ball downfield, way downfield all game long. And I think it's going to take some sustained drives for these 2 teams to score against each other. Now, this is one of those totals when I say under. I also like to say this isn't for the weak-hearted, okay? Because this could turn into a track meet. But I do believe enough in it that it stays under that I made my bet on the under. 66 is where it sits right now.
This is an interesting game because Oregon's sitting at number 5, Washington's number 4. So you would assume in the college football playoff poll that Oregon would make that jump into number 4. We're going to get to the Big 12 because there's a lot of stuff happening here in moving pieces. I was just surprised it was this big of a line, but it does seem that Washington's been living on the edge the last couple of weeks. I mean, they've skirted by a lot of the teams they've played.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at go back and look at that, I mean, the first Oregon-Washington game, I mean, if you look at the dynamics of that entire game, it's I go back and look at that, and it's one of those like, man, how did Oregon lose that game? And so now it's one of those things you look at. I thought Washington was probably playing its best football of the season at the time they played Oregon. And I thought Oregon, I don't want to say gave the game away, but I mean, there were some mistakes made. They had some things that went against them in that game that I thought cost them the game. And I'm looking at this now just going, okay, Washington has not been playing as well now as I thought they did earlier in the year. Oregon has continued to play well. And I think this is, Scott, you said 6 out of 10, and I know you're talking gamblers numbers there in your head. That's betting math. In my mind, this is a team where if Oregon plays Washington 9 times out of 10, or plays Washington in 10 games, they win 9 times out of 10.
You know what it reminds you mentioned that, Rob, where you know what it reminds me of? 1999, when Nebraska went to Texas in the regular season. Carell Buchalter and Dan Alexander fumbled the game away, essentially, and then Texas and Nebraska met again for the Big 12 championship. and Nebraska
destroyed them. Wasn't even
Yeah.
close.
Yeah. So it does remind me of 1999 a little bit. So, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting game. Next up is one to really keep an eye on. It's the Big 12 Championship game Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning. This is on ABC. Texas, a 15.5-point favorite over Oklahoma State. The over-under at 55. Scott, the reason I said this is interesting, Texas has beaten Bama. It has one loss on the year. If it's sitting at number 6 in the college football playoff poll, they got to kick the shit out of Oklahoma State or they're not going to get in at all.
Well, that's the thing. You look at, like, we'll talk about Michigan in a bit, but we'll talk about like Oregon, Washington. Oregon doesn't need style points. They just need to beat Washington. Texas needs style points against this opponent. That's all there is to it. By the way, real quick note, since we're talking Texas, you were talking Texas and Nebraska. I did some work with John Makovic a few years ago, and we talked about, like, when he went forward on 4th down and the one championship game and all that kind of stuff. His mind is still as sharp as a razor. And he talks about how he and, the Nebraska coaching staff afterwards, how Osborne was like shaking his head about, some of that stuff that happened when he went for it on 4th down and how that game played out. But I just wanted to mention that he's still around. John Makovic, last time we met, it was about a year and a half or so ago here on the Strip, had dinner together. And just listening to the way he coached that team, you're talking about a champagne coach in a beer drinking city. And it was just interesting to hear the differences between his personality and the school that he was coaching. But good stuff. Anyway, yeah, they need style points in this one. And, the concern about two things, if you're looking at Oklahoma State, I'm just kind of checking out the lines right now, everything is that, one, you got Alan Bowman, who makes mistakes, 11 picks, only 10 touchdowns thrown this season, 6 interceptions he's thrown in Okie State's last 3 games. And another thing, Oklahoma State's defense is bad. I mean, statistically speaking, against the run, against the pass, total yards allowed, they're one of the worst in college football. And they've allowed 109 points in their last 3 games combined, 2 of which came against BYU and Houston. BYU's 23 points per game if you don't include if you do include what they did against Oak State. Houston's 24 points per game. Those 2 teams are scoring at will against Oklahoma State the last couple of weeks. Then you look at Texas, 15 seconds and 4 points from the undefeated season, being in the top 4 right now as we speak. They had a -3 turnover ratio in that game against Oklahoma. And as far as Ewers, I don't know, man, 70% passer, 17 touchdowns, 5 picks. I don't think he's going to make any mistakes. Plus, he's got Brooks, who can pick him up and put him down, 1,100-plus yards on the season. So balanced offense, 5th against the run. Oak State's defense can pass. Texas can be had through the air at times. So you've always got that chance if Texas opens up a lead for that old hated backdoor cover if you're playing the favorite. I worry about that. I think Gundy will have his team prepared. You also have to worry in a game like this, is Texas going to be so hell-bent on looking pretty and looking sexy to get into that Final Four that they miss a couple things and make a couple of mistakes that they normally wouldn't. I'm going to say Texas ends up winning this game by 17. I have not made a bet on it. I probably will not make a bet on this game.
The interesting part is Texas fans are pissed off because Gundy was named the Big 12 Coach of the Year today, and they look at it as a total slight for the Big 12 that Sarkisian didn't get it. I think that's even more motivation for Texas.
Absolutely. Well, he's going to the SEC. Why should they vote him as the Coach of the Year, right?
True. True.
Wait,
Rob,
so
thoughts on this game?
Wait, so Gundy got Big 12 Coach of the Year?
Yes. I mean, that's as bad as David Braun getting the Big 10 Coach of the Year.
Okay, you and I discussed this. Braun had that hands down and should have gotten
hands
it.
Down, never mind. We're not gonna. We argued about it last Sunday.
Well, here's the thing. Number one. Okay, so 2 things. Number one, how did Matt Campbell not get it? He loses like half his starters before the season starts. And number 2, what?
I mean, they went 7-5
with that roster,
but they still went 7-5. So I mean, they weren't going to give it to anybody from Oklahoma or Texas. Gundy got to the championship game. This is the reason I'm surprised Kirk Ferentz didn't get in the Big 10. Usually, if you get to a championship game, you're a Coach of the Year, right? I mean, that's kind of like.
I get it. I'm just saying, in terms of coaching jobs, I thought Leipold, Kleiman, or Campbell all did a better coaching job.
I don't disagree.
Now,
with
my my question for Scott is: you mentioned the 4-point difference in the 3 turnovers in that Oklahoma Texas game. if Texas wins that game against Oklahoma, where are they sitting right now?
Probably in
your opinion.
Third or fourth at the worst. It would be you're still going to get Michigan, Georgia, and Oregon ahead of Texas, but Texas a very strong number 4 if they get past Oklahoma. And maybe I'm underselling them.
They're undefeated at that point.
Right.
Hell, you can make the argument for number. I mean, they've got more wins against top 25 teams than anybody in the top 8 right now. Mm-hmm. Plus, you got to win at Alabama. That goes a long way. I think that's a lot of street cred. I'm with Scott. I think they'd be number 3. I think Michigan would be number 2, and Georgia number 1. But I mean, But the weird thing is they need style points now. They definitely need style points.
This is an argument. We need a 16-team playoff.
There you go. And I hate handicapping games where the team is clear-cut choice better than the other squad. And if it was, week 11 or week 10 or 9 of the regular season, you're laying the 15 points. But you got to factor all that BS into it. Like, they got to go out, they got to win, 49-14 to impress, the committee and all that kind of stuff. So it adds an extra little wrench into the system when it comes to the handicap of those games.
Let's go to the SEC. This is a battle we're getting used to seeing. It's a 3:00 game on CBS. It's at Alabama and Georgia. Georgia 5.5-point favorite. You're over under at 54.5. Bama didn't do itself any favors last week, Scott, with that close call with Auburn.
I thought they'd have a little bit easier time with Auburn. It wasn't just based on what happened the previous week when Auburn got spanked by New Mexico State. It was a situation even before that game where I had Alabama a little bit bigger favorite than what they were going into the Georgia game. And again, they needed another miracle, man. It's crazy. Another miracle finish to get that victory. So, listen, this line, by the way, for this game has been as low as 4 and as high as 6. And right now it's kind of sitting, like you said, 5.5, couple of 5s out there. I got about 20 books on my line service on my screen. A lot of folks were, back on the bandwagon going into last week's game when it came to Alabama, and those same folks are jumping off the bandwagon after they almost got beat by the Auburn Tigers. Here's an interesting note. SEC title games, 13-4-1 to the over the last 18. Indoors, if a conference game is being played indoors, over the last 60 conference title games, 56% of those games that are being played indoors have gone over the total. So you got a couple things working for you there when you want to talk about this total sitting at 54.5. Interesting thing to watch. Georgia gave up 5 yards per carry to Tennessee and Georgia Tech the last 2 weeks. And Bama has that running game now churning out 6 yards per pop. So potential, relative weakness in that Georgia defense may get exploited and keep this game close for Alabama this week. Bama, 34 points or more in 4 of the last 5 games. And the game they didn't hit 34 was last week, but they did gain 6.63 yards per play against Auburn. You look at Georgia, 40 points per game the last 7 games on offense. The initial move on the total this week went down, and then it started to inch its way back up. I like the over in this one, guys. I haven't pulled a trigger on the side yet. I have made a little bet on the over. I might get involved in the next couple of days as I kind of like to see where the number is moving, if it's going to move at all. I really wanted to see 6.5, and I was thinking about coming back on the underdog. I'm not sure we're going to get there. I'm really concerned as a potential Georgia bettor, again, with their run defense against Tennessee and Ja Tech and the way Alabama's running the football. I also am always squeamish when it comes to a team that everybody was jumping on, saying, oh boy, Alabama's back to being Alabama. And then because of one game, recent history, recency bias, as we like to call it, all of a sudden, all those people have jumped ship. Oh, Alabama's going to get trashed. They're going to get destroyed. So I'm kind of caught in the middle of that right now as far as the side. I do think the total goes over.
You look at that one game, you look at that Auburn game. How much does the fact that this is, for Auburn, this is like their game every year.
Sure.
When you've got a huge rivalry game, as a Nebraska fan, I don't think we understand.
Let me tell you
certain rivalries nationwide.
Let me tell you a story. In 1995, I went down to Gene Stallings is the head coach at Alabama. I go down and watch Alabama and Southern Miss at Legion Field. And I'm just walking around and I'm talking to Alabama fans. And my question was, how big is the Alabama-Auburn rivalry? And he goes, sir, let me tell you something. If Jesus Christ himself showed up at the Auburn-Alabama game, they would tell him to get the fuck off the field and let us finish this game before we have to do the go to heaven. I mean, that was the exact word that I'm like, oh, that's a pretty big deal then, huh? It's a pretty big deal.
Surprised you were run out of town for asking how big of a deal it was.
Yeah, I mean, say you're an outsider without saying you're an outsider. Ask that question.
Well, okay, so here's my question, Scott. When you've got true rivalry games like this, and I mean, I'm looking at I was up watching Florida State this weekend. You look at Auburn, Alabama. I mean, there's a lot of Auburn, Alabama games where one team was by far and away not good. The other one was very much a better team. How much does that affect these games? In terms of how Vegas is looking at this, the number, how much are handicappers looking at that, the rivalry aspect when it is a true rivalry? Yeah,
this isn't a manufactured Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, Nebraska rivalry.
Exactly.
This is hate on both sides. And I do tend to look. I'll start my handicap obviously with my power rating, and then the next thing I'll do is I'll start trying to figure out, if a team is able to bring that emotion that they have in the game that they're going to play onto the field, if there's enough talent. One thing we know about Auburn, they lost to Jerry Kill. I mean, he's a fantastic coach. Should have never lost like that. Maybe you lose, but you don't lose by getting blown out on your field. They were certainly looking ahead. But I look at the talent, and I'm like, the talent's not that far off right now this season between Bama and Auburn. And that's not a knock against Alabama. And so I start looking at that, and then I look to see if I think the line's too big. So it does become a factor because I'm looking, if the team is halfway decent, I'm looking first, I want to back the dog, now find stuff that gets me off the dog when it comes to a heated rivalry like the Iron Bowl. I got one experience. I wasn't a player, obviously, but I got an experience in the Nebraska-Oklahoma rivalry in the 70s. Real quick story. We like to throw these at you every once in a while. I'm going to be that old man sipping on his, homemade lemonade on his front porch telling stories to my grandkids one day. And she better not have one for about another 10 years, my daughter. But anyway, so we're driving down to Texas. I got some family in Texas. My dad's driving. This is probably like 1977 or something like that. I'm maybe 10 years old. My mom and dad in the front of the car. I'm in the back. Big old bumper sticker across the back bumper, Go Big Red, Nebraska, all this kind of stuff. Dad was a huge Husker fan. And so we pull up to this little small town in Oklahoma, real small town. Got to get gas. The parking lot for the gas station is dirt. There's no asphalt, nothing. It's dirt. A couple of big boys come walking out. My dad goes walking in to the gas station. I swear to God, my mom goes, and they were saying, Nebraska, huh? And they're doing all this kind of stuff, a little bit of an accent. My mom said when he walked in the gas station, if he's not out in 5 minutes, we're out of here. We're leaving him. So and they were going back and forth about Nebraska, Oklahoma. And they had that kind of look on their face like, we're making you think we're joking. We ain't joking. So I did get to see a little bit of that. And that still goes on, of course, in Alabama with the Iron Bowl. But yeah, getting back to your question, I want to take the dog usually if the talent gap isn't that big. And I didn't last week in the game. I couldn't do it. I couldn't pull the trigger. And I was at the UNLV game, which I didn't see the difference between this year's UNLV and the last 30 years in that particular game. And I only watched about, I'm going to say, the final 15 minutes of game that I recorded Alabama and Auburn. But again, I'm rattling on and on here. I would look to take the dog first in a true, huge rivalry matchup, as long as that dog's not a 2-10 team. And Auburn's certainly far from that talent-wise.
Probably the least sexy game this weekend is the ACC Championship. It's and Rob's going to be watching this because his daughter goes to Florida State. Rob, we got some shit on YouTube today because you weren't wearing Nebraska gear during the podcast. You were wearing your Florida State thing. I still don't understand that why people think we have to wear gear. Well, I'm never going to wear gear, but they're like, why isn't Rob wearing gear? He's wearing gear. He's just wearing Florida State gear. They took it on Louisville, and that's how I say it, right? Louisville. Florida State, a 2.5-point favorite. The over-under at 47.5. Louisville got beat last week by Kentucky as well.
Listen, first of all, I was expected to see a Florida State jersey this week, so I was a little bit disappointed. But you pulled out the Augustana, and who can argue with that? Louisville's my favorite team this year, and I'll tell you why. My second biggest play I made this entire season came before the season began, not actual game, and that was over 8 wins on Louisville. And so we hit that a couple of weeks ago. It was pretty easy. Went 2-1 on futures. I had Louisville over 8. I won Wake Forest under 6.5, and I lost a small plan in Wisconsin over 8.5. I guess I fell for the Luke Fickell, here we come, we're going to be top 10 this year, but ended up going 2-1. The biggest play was Louisville. So I've been a very big fan of this team since before the season began. Florida State's top 4, obviously, if they've got Jordan. It's as simple as that, Jordan Travis. And what a bummer for him not to be able to play. I'm watching Rodemaker a little bit last week, filling in for him, and his decision-making didn't look great. And I don't mean that as an insult. It just looks like an inexperienced quarterback who doesn't have that game time under his belt. Like, let's say, for instance, Travis would have, to make decisions right when they had to be made. There was like a little split-second hesitation. He goes 12 for 25, and he also got banged up. He got hit hard in the noggin, came back and played a little bit later. We're not sure really how healthy Rodemaker is right now, and he didn't look great when he was healthy. And Florida could have won that game. Boy, it's, they're a well-coached team, Florida State, but Braum equals that out, the coaching situation. The talent level still lies with Florida State, but guys, I think Louisville's going to knock them off here, and I just think it comes down to the quarterback situation.
Wow.
If Travis is out there, I think Florida State wins by 10, 14 points.
There you go, Rob. How's that make you feel? He picked the upset.
Damn. I mean, my emotions are still with Florida State. I thought Rodemaker came – it was one of those things where I thought his decision-making late in the game improved a ton. I mean, I thought he looked way better in the fourth quarter than he did the third, second, first. He's definitely not Jordan Travis. I will say that. Jordan Travis is a game changer, and that's one of those guys that if you look at him just from a numbers standpoint, the fact that he hasn't gotten the Heisman recognition that I think he deserves is kind of impressive, because the numbers are there. And it's paid huge dividends for Florida State over the last 2 years. So I don't know. This is a game that scares me, because I also think Louisville's sitting here looking at that Kentucky game going, crap, we just lost our big rivalry game of the year. We've got to kind of that's like a refocus loss.
Could this be a situation where it's the least sexy game but end up being the best game of the championship games?
Oh, I totally think it could be. I mean, I think you've got two teams that are both capable of playing really, really good football. The Alabama-Georgia one, I think that one's closer than what people think it's going to end up being. But this is one where I think you've got two teams that are capable of putting up points, of playing some really good football, and could be the most fun out of all of these games.
Bothers me a bit because, and I agree with you, it's like once Rodemaker got hit in the noggin, he actually seemed to focus better, as crazy as that sounds. But the Noles only had 224 yards last week on 4 yards per play. 4 yards per play, not per carry. That would be scaring me right now if I was a Florida State backer. I think Louisville, again, because they're equal as far as – I have the coaching staffs rated equal in this one. Florida State's talent up and down both sides of the line of scrimmage, secondary, all that is above Louisville's. There's no doubt about that, except at quarterback. And when I went back and I was watching bits and pieces of the game, I thought, boy, I don't know, 4 yards per play, that's it. So maybe having that game under his belt, Rodemaker, with that offense, and they know exactly what he can do and cannot do, helps them out in this game. But I just think, and by the way, if I'm telling people right now, if you're saying, what should I do with this game? I have to play this game. I would say take Louisville on the money line plus $1.15. There's better value with that than taking the 2.5 points. You might get beat. You might lose by 1, but the value over the course of a long period of time is better at plus $1.15 to win than it is at taking the 2.5 points and having to lay 11 to win 10.
All right, let's wrap up our games with the Big Ten Championship. Yes, we have to. It is Saturday, 7 o'clock. It's going to be on Fox. Iowa, Michigan. Michigan, a 22-point favorite. A 22-point favorite in the over-under at 35. My God. And Scott texted me today. I think Scott just likes to rub it in every once in a while.
That's brutal math. That's brutal math right there.
Well, no, here's what even worse. Iowa's point total for the first half, Rob, opened at 0.5. 0.5. And then jump to what, 2.5, Scott?
I think it's 2.5. So folks are thinking they're going to get a field goal those first 2 quarters.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. We were doing a show earlier on Wednesday, and we were talking about this game, and I only mess with Travis when Iowa beats Nebraska, which is, like I said, every year now, except for last year. But I'm sitting down at one of the casinos here. We're doing a show at one of the sports books, and they said, we talked about the side, we talked about the total, and I guess in theory the books are saying with this line in total, Michigan 29, Iowa 6. And I said, Iowa 6 against Michigan. Are they playing 6 quarters? I mean, it's like, sorry, Travis. So anyway,
I mean, I said this on my show today, and that is, listen, the only way Iowa wins, I'm a realist. I get it, right? The only way Iowa wins is if that defense scores twice, 3 times, and a special teams play, because the offense isn't going to beat Michigan, and Michigan's going to have to turn the ball over. That's the only way.
I know he can't win Coach of the Year, but I'll make an argument with Ferentz because he has nothing to work with on offense. He's got an offensive coordinator who's out the door, who did a terrible job while he was in Iowa City. He doesn't have a quarterback. I mean, a lot of the same situations Nebraska has when it comes to offense, yet they're so fundamentally sound when it comes to not making costly key mistakes. And for that reason, I said, I have no problem with Ferentz being second or third of the Big Ten coaches when it comes to Coach of the Year. This team's not 10-2. This is a 5-7 team. He coached the crap out of this team to get them where they are. The defensive coaches, they don't make dumb mistakes. He's got basically a third-string quarterback starting for him in Deacon Hill. 11 for 28 last week, 94 yards. They had 57 yards of offense, as you guys know, in the second half against Nebraska, and 2 first downs. Found a way to win, took advantage of the other team's mistakes. Problem with Michigan, they don't make mistakes under Harbaugh. And boy, they don't need style points. That's the cool thing going for Iowa. Michigan doesn't need style points, but Harbaugh's a little ticked off at the Big Ten. This looks like a 34-6, 38-7 type of game. And Iowa hangs around only if Michigan makes mistakes they haven't made all year. I really believe that.
Rob, this could be one of those games where let's say the under hits at under 35. Let's say they won like 28-0 or 28-3, right? It would be one of those games where you got down, you're like, okay, it was probably closer than you thought, but you just felt like Michigan kicked the crap out of them. You know what I mean? It would be like,
well, that was like the Michigan. Close. Yeah, we talked about the Michigan-Penn State game, and it was almost like Michigan didn't care about scoring points. Yeah. They were more concerned about, hey, we're just going to kind of control the time of possession and push all around the field the whole day. We don't even score we don't even care if we score a touchdown. We just want to shove you all over the place. And I could see this being that same kind of game. The problem is when I look at this, I mean, you look at what Penn State did against Iowa and you look at what Michigan did against Penn State.
Yep.
I mean, you've got a couple of levels of.
No, you got more than a couple levels. You've got like 3 or 4 levels.
I mean, the difference between these two teams is kind of brutal.
And also, I mean, 2 years ago, they played each other for the title. Yeah. Iowa's offense was better than this year's offense. It's 42-3 final score. I mean, Michigan's just going to have to dial it down, I think, for this to be any kind of a close game. Like you said, I could see that, Travis, where it's, 27-3 final. And the game is not as close as the final score. Yeah. They just continue to wear down Iowa's defense because the defense gets zero help from the offense. And they end up winning 27. They're up 17-3 at the half. They win 30-6 or something.
And I don't see Michigan looking past Iowa because, as Jim Harbaugh said, Michigan's America's team right now, and they feel like it's Michigan against the world. I believe they feel like it's.
Come out to Vegas. We'll put you on the sideline with the Raiders. We'll take you next year.
Hey, don't forget about BetFred's no sweat first bet offer. When you sign up with BetFred and make your first wager of $20 or more, you'll be matched with a Fred bet up of $105. If that bet loses, use the promo code RUSH. That's RUSH, all caps. So use the promo code RUSH. The parlay bonus, when you place 9 football parlays, the 10th parlay is on Fred. Get rewarded with up to a $100 Fred bet each week of the pro football season. Use the promo code parlay. And if you like what you heard from Scott Spreitzer tonight, you can work with him one-on-one. Text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get a free trial of the $60 premium member picks from Scott, or you can visit docsports.com, sign up for the free 60 on the upper left hand of the website. Scott, we got a question earlier. Somebody called me, and they were wondering about the point spreads. And he's like, do the books ever lose money? I said, well, overall, the books probably never lose money. Yeah. But he didn't understand that they could lose a lot on one particular game. They can lose money on games, right?
Sure. I mean, every once in a while you'll see on, different TV shows, network sports shows where they talk about betting now, where they'll say, some guy in New York had a $30 bet on a 20-team parlay, and it paid off, and he turned $30 into $180,000, stuff like that. There's people in Vegas that have bet 7 figures on a game and won in the past, but the books never lose overall, start to finish. I mean, if making book was legal, I'd tell everybody to go do it because you got to be pretty dumb to not make money as a bookmaker. You really do. You got to be stupid as hell. And so, I mean, you really do. And if you're at a mom and pop shop, which I understand it might be going on still in Nebraska since they don't have legalized betting. If you're running a mom and pop shop and you're losing money, dude, get out of the business right now, because and the bottom line is you can adjust lines. I mean, I got a guy, friend of mine, he's an attorney in North Carolina. I've known him for 25 years. He'll call me and he'll say, hey, what do you like tomorrow? I like Oklahoma -6. So he comes back and he calls me and he goes, and then let's say they win by 7. Son of a, bitch, we pushed. I can't believe he gave it. But I'm like, what are you talking about pushed? I'm like, it's 6. Well, my guy down the street, and so I started telling him, I go, here's what you do. You never say who you want. You say to your bookmaker, I shouldn't be saying this stuff, but I'm going to anyway. You say to your bookmaker, what's the Alabama-Auburn line? Then he gives you the line, and then you tell him who you want to bet. You don't say, hey, I love Alabama. What's the line? Because that line's going up. but as far as behind the counters where it's regulated, all over the legalized states now, the state of Nevada, all that kind of stuff, they don't lose. They'll cry poor. They love to do that crap. I've known Jimmy Vaccaro for 30 years, and some of those guys that are out here in the different books, and they'll whine and they'll cry and they'll say, oh, we had a bad weekend. All the teasers in the NFL paid off. Monday Night Football squares won. Blah, 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 blah. They don't lose money. They just love to hear themselves whine. They win every single season. Now, you have individuals. I've been one in the past, not so much this year, in the past where we beat the books individually. And that happens. I've had my money rejected at books after having a good run. Actually had some bets that they've said no at the sports books. We're not going to take your action. My people called. Was that? I'll let you.
Vincenti. So he's Italian. He says, "Hey, my people called.
Vincentini.
It would behoove you all to stop discussing local shops."
Oh, I love it. Got to be an Omaha boy.
Brings back the memories. I tell you what, we've been doing this show for 15 straight weeks. Scott, I can't thank you enough for giving up your Wednesday nights to spend with Rob and I. And Rob, I can't thank you enough for giving up your Wednesday night for spending it with Scott and me.
It's really tough talking sports and drinking beer. I mean, I got to tell you, it's hard.
And we do got to thank our phone screener and producer, Owen Justice, who hasn't had to take many phone calls this year. We did have Zach earlier, but Owen has always been there with us every week, so we appreciate that. Owen's got a album release show coming out on December. His album comes out December 8th. The album release show is at Maloney's in Council Bluffs, Iowa on the 15th. Just visit Owen Justice Music to get your tickets right there. So,
is there a story behind it? Was it Upstream, right? Isn't that what it's called, Upstream?
Yeah.
Is there a story behind that?
There may be. He doesn't tell me anything. Okay. I mean, he keeps everything guarded very close to the chest. He doesn't. And I've learned, Scott. It's taken me about 3 years. I've learned not to ask questions, right? Okay, because gotcha. I just get pushback. I'm sure there's something that has to do with it, but I just choose not to ask because I'll get told, don't worry about it anyway. So I've just learned that's what I've done. All right. For Scott Spreitzer, for Dr. Rob Zatechka, I'm Travis Justice. Thank you so much for watching Behind the Point Spread. We might be back. If I can twist Scott's arm, maybe come back for the college football championship game or maybe even the playoffs. But we'll keep you posted on that. So we won't see you for a while. Everybody have a great holiday season. Merry Christmas. And thanks for watching Behind the Point Spread, presented by BetFred Sports.